It is something of a desperate landmark moment. The UK getting beyond 29,000 deaths and, as you've probably heard, overtaking Italy to become to have the biggest death toll in Europe. It's worth asking the question whether these comparisons are actually of any use, and I'm not entirely sure that they are. Not in that sense. You'll remember this chart. There is one one way in which it's worth just looking at how different countries have been evolving, and that is to get a sense of where you're heading. So we did look at this chart and looked at trajectories and looked at how the UK was tracking Italy for a while, and it gave us a sense of where we might be heading. But as for the absolute numbers, well, let's have a look at where they are at the moment. You can see there. The UK now at 29,427 deaths compared with Italy, 29,315 deaths. Clearly the UK higher there. And if you look at it in bold terms, just taking those numbers and putting them into kind of a bar chart, you can see pretty clearly the US there with by far and away the most deaths from COVID-19, the UK and then Italy and then Spain, France and Belgium on this, quite a long way down. But it's worth bearing in mind, you've probably kind of spotted the kind of thing here, which is that the US has a large population, far larger than most of these other countries. The UK has a bigger population than Italy. So what would be slightly better, actually, is to take this chart and adjust it so that each of these lines are adjusted for population. I can do that for you now, and it's a subtly different picture here. Belgium, which was quite low down, has suddenly gone up towards the top. And Spain is still up there. Actually, Spain's above the UK. Italy's above the UK. Ireland is actually quite close to the UK, and Ireland is above the US. And so when you just take those numbers and adjust them for population, which is one way of looking at this, you get a very different picture. It is still very bad indeed for the UK and for many other countries, but it is not quite the same picture as you might have seen from those overall numbers. The UK there below Italy, below Spain, and actually the country with the most severe COVID-19 outbreak as in population-adjusted terms is Belgium. Look at Belgium over there, 694 deaths per million of the population. And what this underlines is that there are so many different ways of measuring this. I'm not saying any one is the definitive, but just bear that in mind when you hear these scary numbers. I'll give you a sense of this. Three key measures we're going to bear in mind. Now, the first of them you'll have heard a lot, and this is the one we're talking about at the moment, which is the numbers that the government give us every day on how many people have died of COVID-19. You can see a week and a half ago, it was up to 22,000, according to what we got from the government each day. But that's not everything. We also get more coherent, more comprehensive numbers from the ONS, which include everyone who's died of COVID-19, or at least who has COVID-19 on their death certificate. And their numbers show actually at that point it was higher, so not 22,000 but 26,000. But according to the chief scientific advisor, there is a different kind of number we should be looking at, which is not just COVID-19 diagnosed deaths, but all excess deaths which are considerably higher. And I'm going to show you why that matters if we look at what's happened in the care home sector. This line here shows you how many people have died each week of the year, just over the course of the last few years. So the average number of people who die in care homes over the year. And what we do, if we look at just where we are this year so far, you can see excess deaths. So the number of people who have died above that line have risen to 16,000 in total over that period. That's a high number. But here's what's intriguing. If we break that down, look at this. 6,000, only 6,000 of those deaths are notified as COVID-19 deaths. That means there's an extra 10,000 excess deaths that simply aren't explained by those numbers that we get every day. That's pretty striking, and that's why excess deaths is probably the best measure of what's going on. You know, we don't know precisely why these people have died, but it's so far above the average. One would assume it's associated with either the lockdown or indeed just undiagnosed COVID-19. And it's the same picture across the UK, not quite as marked, but this shows you all deaths across England and Wales. And it's a similar picture, I should say, in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Excess deaths since March, 38,000. Let's break that down, and you can see 27,000 of them were diagnosed as COVID-19 or on the certificate. 11,000 weren't. So you've got an extra 11,000 deaths across the UK that simply haven't been explained, above the average. Now, we need to focus on excess deaths to get the most comprehensive measure of what's going on in the UK and indeed other countries. And I should say other countries because remember, when we're talking about whether the UK has overtaken Italy, as some people seem fixated on, the question is what measure? And we know, for instance, from this measure that the UK is undercounting excess deaths in those daily numbers we get by about 40%. So the daily numbers are about 40% below where the eventual excess deaths may turn out to be. And if we compare just one point where each country got beyond 11,000 deaths. This is, again, those official daily numbers that we have. On the 31st of March, Italy went beyond 11,000 deaths. On the 10th of April, the UK went at the same point. What we now know is that at that point, actually, those weren't the full death tolls. There were a lot more excess deaths on top of that. So in the UK, there were 4,000 excess deaths that just weren't counted by those daily tolls that we've got. But here's the striking thing. Look at Italy. We now know there were 13,700 deaths that just weren't counted in those official numbers. So whereas the UK is undercounting excess deaths at that point by 38%, Italy was undercounting them by, well, it was double the actual total of death toll that we got each day. What that underlines is when we're looking at these numbers, when we're looking at death tolls, there are so many different ways of measuring it. And while the overall number at the moment may say that the UK has overtaken Italy to have the biggest death toll in Europe, actually the definitive numbers, excess deaths, may not show them. Unfortunately, though, it'll be a while until we get these numbers.